I have driven past Wilburton Hill Park in Bellevue probably 200 times. I knew the botanical garden was there. I had parked there. I had pointed it out to visitors. I thought I understood what it was. Last Thursday morning, I showed up for new volunteer orientation, and I discovered I had no idea. Welcome to the Mosaic Mind. I'm Krishnan Iyer. Today, I want to tell you about 3 hours that completely changed the way I see my city. It started, as the best things often do, with a pause before the beginning. The volunteer coordinator, a man named Colin, who has been running the program there for about 4 years, opened the session not with a safety video or a welcome packet. He opened with a land acknowledgment, a quiet recognition of the indigenous peoples who have cared for this land since long before any of us arrived. We were in Bellevue, in a modern community building, on a gray March morning. And before we talked about plants or volunteer hours or sign-in procedures, we stopped and named who was here before us. That set the tone for everything that followed. Then, Colin asked us to introduce ourselves and share a favorite plant. I want to tell you about some of the people in that room because this is the part I keep thinking about. There was Jing, originally from Shanghai, who told us her city is famous for magnolias, and she has been dreaming of planting one in her Bellevue yard since she arrived. There was Becky, who that very morning had spotted her trillium coming up in her garden and was still glowing from it. There was Oana from Sammamish, who admits she mixes up the plants in her yard constantly and just keeps trying things. There was Kathy from Kirkland, a substitute teacher who loves daffodils and signed up to be a garden greeter. And there was Lindsay, who got into gardening after buying her first home and now shares her backyard with, in her words, bunnies who love petunias. And then there was me. I talked about growing calendula hydroponically in my house, drying the flowers, and making tea out of them. Someone asked for the recipe, and suddenly everyone got curious about hydroponics. It is very simple. You just take the flowers, dry them, put them in hot water, and drink. That's it. But that small moment told me something about the room. This was not a group of people who all looked the same or came from the same background or had the same reason for being there. We were a circle of people from different countries and different careers and different seasons of life. And we had all ended up in the same place on a Thursday morning because something about growing things had called to us. That is the mosaic part. That is always the part I find most interesting. Now, here is the thing Colin told us that genuinely surprised me. The Bellevue Botanical Garden is not one organization. It is a coalition. 9 nonprofits and the City of Bellevue all working together to govern and maintain and program a 53-acre living museum. The city owns the land. The Bellevue Botanical Garden Society handles fundraising and education. And then there are 8 more nonprofit partners: the Hardy Fern Foundation, the Eastside Fuchsia Society, King County Master Gardeners, the Northwest Perennial Alliance, the Puget Sound, Dahlia Association, the Washington Native Plant Society, the North American Rock Garden Society's Northwest Chapter, and the East Lake Washington District of Garden Clubs. 6,000 plants, 3,000 individual varieties, 400 volunteers, 17,500 volunteer hours every single year. And here is the thing that stopped me when Colin said it. No admission fee. It is a free, open, public botanical garden run by this extraordinary coalition for the entire community. 9 nonprofits, 1 public agency, the City of Bellevue, all running this together for free. I did not know that was possible. No admission fee ever. Colin described it well. He said, "The mission of the garden is to display the best plants and gardening practices for the community of Bellevue." He said not a lot of people in Bellevue have large open yard spaces, but they have patios, they have balconies, and there are still beautiful ways to bring a garden into those small spaces. The garden exists to show them how. The tour moved through several different sections, and each one had its own story to tell. In an area called Habitats at Home, we met a volunteer named Charles, who had spent the morning placing leaves back onto the ground after temporarily moving them to do some work. He explained why the leaves needed to go back. There had been 7 salamanders hibernating in the pile. Below them, small black beetles were doing their work, aerating the soil, spreading fungus that helps with decomposition. The leaf pile was not untidiness. It was a whole working ecosystem. Charles looked at us and said something I have been turning over in my mind since. He said, "When you do a cleanup, you are taking resources out of the environment. When you put them back, you are supporting everything that shares your garden with you." He was talking about composting, but he was also talking about something bigger, about the difference between a garden that looks clean and a garden that is alive. Nearby, we passed a grouping of 5 sculptures. They were birds cast in weathered tones, each one fixed at a different angle as if caught mid-movement. These were the Lost Bird Project, created by artist Todd McGrain. 5 North American birds, all extinct since roughly 1850. The garden placed them there not as decoration, but as a question. What does it mean to lose something beautiful and irreplaceable? What choices lead to that outcome? And what choices lead away from it? It is not a comfortable question to sit with in a garden that is trying to be a healthy ecosystem. That is, I think, exactly the point. We also walked through the Waterwise garden, where raised beds grow food using drip irrigation caged with wire to protect the harvest from the deer and rabbits of Wilburton Hill. Colin mentioned that this garden needs the most volunteers right now, and that the people who work there get to take home produce and grapes from the trellises overhead. He said it was his favorite garden because he cares about water conservation. I believed him. At the center of the garden is a mid-century modern house, pole park construction, designed by a notable Northwest architect. It is now a coffee shop called Copper Kettle Coffee Bar and a small resource library for volunteers. The house belonged to Cal and Harriet Shorts. In the 1980s, the City of Bellevue owned the hillside land where the garden now sits. The plan was office buildings, government facilities. Cal, who was on the park board at the time, and Harriet made a different proposal. They would donate their home and 7.5 acres of private land to the city on the condition that the land become a public park. The city said yes. When a couple named Iris and Bob Jewett heard about the Shorts family's donation, they went to the park's director with one more idea. Not just a park, but a botanical garden, a place where people could come to learn, to experience plants, to feel connected to the living world. The park's director agreed, but with one condition of his own. The community would have to commit to supporting it long term. because a botanical garden is a living museum and an institution. It is a lot more than a pretty park. It cannot run on city budget alone. And so the Bellevue Botanical Garden Society was formed in 1984. And everything since, including the 400 volunteers and the 17,500 hours and the salamanders in the leaf pile and the 5 extinct birds in the sculpture garden, flows from that conversation. During the coffee break, I ran into Paul, a friend from the Pro Club, and then I discovered that Oana, one of the fellow volunteers in our orientation group, was someone I knew from my time at Microsoft. Oana had retired recently and was still finding her footing. Paul had been gone a few years and was full of stories from a month in Japan. Already talking about a winter in London, we stood in the house that exists because someone gave it away and just caught up. Travel, new routines, what's next? Those conversations always feel easy when there's no agenda in the room. I am now officially one of those 400 people. My Master Gardener Clinic is moving from Home Depot to the Botanical Garden. I showed up expecting to learn where the compost bins were. I left thinking about civic infrastructure and donated houses and extinct birds and a circle of strangers who came from Shanghai and Sammamish and Kirkland and who all just wanted to grow something. That is the mosaic mind. That is always what it comes back to. Thank you for listening. I will see you next time.